Winifred Thorne did not weep when her brothers carried her grandmother's writing desk down the stairs. She had dusted that desk for 30 years. She stood in the hall in her plain grey dress and watched it go, and her face never moved. At the reading of the will, before 11 mourning relations, her elder brother Cassius pushed a battered sewing box across the table. "Let Winifred have grandmother's box," he said. "Thread and thimbles. Fit for a thread-and-thimble life." And the room laughed, softly, the way well-fed people laugh. But hold on the box a moment. Look at its bottom, the one that had always stuck. And under the felt lining, folded small, a scrap of paper in the old woman's own hand. Nobody in that room saw it. Not one of them. If you've ever wondered who would stay if you had nothing, this story is for you. Before we go on, subscribe and comment which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you to Bloomsbury in the winter of 1868. The house on Coram Street was tall and narrow and cold in the corners. Winifred Thorne had lived in it since she was a girl. She knew which stair creaked and which window stuck, and where the draught came in under the pantry door. She was 38 years old that winter. She was not pretty. She had never been pretty. Her hair was the colour of wet ash, pinned back plain, and her hands were red at the knuckles from work and weather. But her hands could do things few others could. She was a needlewoman. A fine one. She could set a seam so straight you'd think it was drawn with a rule. She could darn a heel so no eye would find the mend. She could take a torn thing and make it whole, and she loved that work, quietly, the way some people love a garden. She asked for nothing but a good lamp and a still afternoon. For 6 years she had nursed her grandmother. Adelaide Thorne was 91, that winter and mostly bedbound, though her mind was sharp as a pin to the last. She had gone soft in the body and hard nowhere else. Winifred fed her, washed her, read to her, sat up with her through the bad nights when the old woman's chest rattled and the fire had to be watched till dawn. 6 years. Not one of them paid, and not one of them counted, because Winifred did not think of love as a thing you counted. Her brothers thought otherwise. They came at Christmas. They came on rent day, when the little cottage rents from grandmother's few holdings fell due, and they liked to be near the money when it arrived. Cassius came in his good coat and asked after the estate. Ambrose came laughing and left early, but the long grey afternoons, the broth and the basin, and the endless mending of an old woman's nightgowns, those fell to Winifred, and Winifred did not complain of them. She rather liked those afternoons, if the truth be told. Because in the good spells, when Adelaide could sit up, the two of them sewed together by the window. The old woman's fingers were too stiff for fine work now, but she could thread a needle still, and she liked to keep her hands busy while she talked. She talked of old days, of Winifred's grandfather, dead these 40 years, of houses and people long gone to dust, and on the low table between them always sat the box. It was rosewood, dark and close-grained, no bigger than a loaf of bread. The corners were worn pale, where hands had held it. The little brass clasp was broken, and had been broken for years, so the lid only rested, it did not lock. Inside were the ordinary treasures of a long life of sewing, reels of thread in a dozen faded colours, a pincushion shaped like a strawberry, 3 thimbles, 1 silver and worn thin, a paper of needles, a pair of small scissors shaped like a stalk, the blades gone dull. Winifred loved that box more than any grand thing in the house. "You've an eye for that old thing," Adelaide said to her once, watching her polish the lid with a soft cloth. "Everyone else sees splinters. You see the wood." "It's a good box," Winifred said. "It's a secret keeper," the old woman said, and she laughed, a dry little laugh like paper folding. "Keeps its secrets better than a curate, that box, better than any lawyer I ever paid." She tapped the lid with one crooked finger. "Mind the bottom, now, it sticks. Always has. Don't go forcing it, child, you'll crack the wood. Leave it be." "I'll leave it be," said Winifred, and thought no more of it. Why would she? An old box, an old woman's fondness. There was nothing in it but thread. She set the box down and went to bank the fire, and outside the snow came down on Coram Street, and that was the whole of her world, and she was content in it. She did not know it was already the beginning of the end. The bad spell came in February. Adelaide's chest went from a rattle to a roar, and the doctor came twice and then stopped coming, because there was nothing left to do but wait. Winifred sat with her every hour. She did not send for her brothers until it was near, because she knew what they would bring into the room, and she wanted the room quiet. The last afternoon was grey and still. Adelaide lay small in the great bed, her hair loose and white on the pillow, her breath coming shallow. Winifred held her hand. The old woman's eyes were shut, and then they opened, clear as anything, and found her granddaughter's face. "Winifred," she said. "I'm here, grandmother. I'm right here." The old woman's mouth worked. Her voice was a thread of a thing now, and Winifred had to lean close to catch it. "Mind the lining," Adelaide said. "Measure twice." Winifred smiled, though her eyes stung. It was a seamstress's saying, the sort of fond nonsense the old woman had murmured to her 100 times over 100 hems. "Measure twice, cut once." "Mind your lining." It was as ordinary and dear to her as a lullaby. "I'll measure twice," Winifred whispered. "Always rest now." Adelaide's fingers moved. Under the coverlet, her hand seemed to close on something small, something she'd had tucked in her palm, and her lips pressed as if she'd meant to say more and hadn't the breath for it. Then the fingers loosened, the clear eyes clouded and shut, and a little while after, so gently that Winifred could not have named the exact moment, the old woman stopped breathing. The room was very quiet. The snow had stopped. Winifred sat a long time and did not weep, because weeping felt too small for what she felt, and because she had promised herself she would be steady to the end. She was the only one there. Her brothers arrived the next morning, in black, and were very correct. The funeral was large and cold. Adelaide Thorne had been somebody once, and the somebodies came. 11 of them at least stood graveside, distant cousins and Thorne connections Winifred half knowed, and every one of them nodded to Cassius and Ambrose and hardly saw the grey woman at the back who had done the actual dying alongside. That was fine. Winifred did not want to be seen. She wanted only to go home and put the house to rights, and so, the day after they laid grandmother down, she began to sort the small things. She came to the box last, on purpose, because it was the hardest. She sat with it in her lap by the cold window and opened the lid and let her fingers move over the reels and the thimbles and the little stalk scissors. Each thing was a memory. She meant to keep the box, of course. Whatever else was fought over in that house, surely no soul alive would fight her for an old sewing box with a broken clasp. She thought she would tidy the inside, and when she reached to lift the bottom tray to shake the loose pins from beneath it, the bottom would not come up. She tried again, gently. It held fast. She ran her thumbnail around the edge where the false bottom met the sides. It was stuck all round, tight as if glued, though there was no glue she could see. Swollen wood, she decided. The box was old and had sat in 100 damp winters. The bottom had swelled in its seat and jammed, and forcing it would only crack the rosewood, and hadn't grandmother said so herself? "Mind the bottom. It sticks. Leave it be." "I'll leave it be," Winifred murmured as she had before, and closed the lid and set the box aside on the mantel. And she thought no more of it that day. But you are leaning in now. You already know what she does not. The reading of the will did not wait long. Mr. Ephraim Blackwood, the family solicitor, was a dry, careful man who did not like the task before him and did it anyway. He gathered them in the front drawing-room where the great desk had stood, and 11 relations came, for a Thorne will was worth the coming, and they arranged themselves in the good chairs with their black gloves folded. But before that reading, in the days between, the brothers had not been idle. Cassius Thorne was 46, and a man of business, which is to say a man who had made a habit of turning other people's things into his own. He took the freehold of the Coram Street house. The will was plain on it, and the will was old, dated years back, before Adelaide's last illness, when her wishes had been what they had been. The house went to Cassius. He walked its rooms the very week she died, and Winifred saw him measuring with his eyes the walls, the windows, the worth. What she did not know then was that Cassius had already spent it. He had borrowed against it. Months before, certain of his expectation, he had gone to the City and Northern Bank and raised a mortgage on the strength of the Bloomsbury address, a good round sum against a house that was not yet his, to cover an overreach in his affairs that he told no one of. The house came to him already carrying a weight he had hung on it himself. But that weight was his secret, and he wore it like a good coat, buttoned tight. Ambrose came for the money. He was 41, the younger brother, and where Cassius gathered, Ambrose spilled. He had a gift for it. He had run through his own portion years ago and lived since on charm and credit and the expectation of more. That winter the more had come due. He owed £900 in gambling notes to men who did not forgive, and the notes fell due in 40 days, and he had not 900 pence to answer them. So when he learned the will left £2,000 in consols and ready cash to be divided among the sons, Ambrose did not weep for his grandmother either. He came alive. 2,000, he said to Cassius, low, in the hall, not knowing his sister mended a curtain 3 feet off behind the door and heard every word. 2,000 in the funds, and cash besides. That clears me, Cass, that answers the notes with room to spare. Thank God the old woman kept her money in something a man can spend. Mind your tongue, Cassius said. She's a week in the ground. A week's a week. My notes don't care. And Ambrose laughed, the loud, easy laugh that had opened so many doors and paid off so few. He had his hand on the largest, loudest inheritance in the house, and he was glad of it, and he had no eyes at all for a battered box on a mantelpiece. Neither of them did. And then there was Drusilla. Cassius's wife was 39 and had an appraiser's soul. She could not enter a room without pricing it. She came into the Coram Street house behind her husband like a bailiff behind a writ, and she walked the drawing-room with her chin up, naming values under her breath. The silver's good, she said, lifting a candlestick to the light. Georgian, that'll fetch. The clock, if the works are sound. These chairs are worth reseating, not much more. The rug's worn through in the centre, but the border's whole, we'll turn it. She priced the mirror, she priced the fender. She priced the very coals in the scuttle, near enough. Then she came to the mantel, and she turned the sewing-box over in her hands, and her lip curled. And what's this sad thing, she said. Splinters and a broken clasp. Not worth the carrying. She set it down harder than she needed to. Give it to the spinster. Winifred can have her thread and her needles. It's all she's fit to hold. And she moved on to the window curtains, and priced those too, and never once looked back at the box, and never once knew what her fingers had just held and set down for nothing. Remember that, when we come to the end. Remember the shilling she named it at. So the day of the reading came, and the room filled, and Winifred sat at the back in her grey dress, with her hands folded still in her lap. Mr. Blackwood cleared his throat and read. The estate of the late Mrs. Adelaide Thorne, he read, valued in total at some £4,200, exclusive of the freehold house. It went out in careful lawyer's language, but the sum of it was plain enough, and the room did the arithmetic as fast as he spoke it. The freehold of the house on Coram Street to Cassius. A murmur, a nod. Cassius inclined his head as a man does when granted only his due. The consols and the residue of cash, some £2,000, divided between the sons Cassius and Ambrose. Ambrose let out a breath he'd been holding. Winifred saw his shoulders drop an inch, saw the relief go through him like drink. 40 days, and here was his answer, handed to him in a dry man's voice, in a cold room. Then there were the small bequests. A ring to a cousin, a set of books to another, a sum to the church. Blackwood read them off, and the relations listened, and Winifred waited, because she had not yet been named, and she began, in a small way, to understand that perhaps she would not be named at all in any way that mattered. She was wrong about that. She was named. Once to my granddaughter Winifred Thorne, Blackwood read, and here his dry voice caught, just slightly, and he did not look up from the paper, the personal sewing box of the late Mrs. Thorne, with its contents. That was all. 6 years. The broth and the basin, the sleepless nights, the last hand held in an empty room, and her portion, read out before 11 relations, was a broken box. Nobody spoke for a moment, and then Cassius did the thing that made it worse than silence. He reached to the sideboard where the box had been set, and he took it up, and he pushed it across the polished table toward his sister. It slid the length of the wood and stopped just short of the edge, near where she sat. "There you are, Winifred," he said. And he was smiling, the smallest kind of smile. Grandmother's box, thread and thimbles, fit for a thread and thimble life. And the room laughed, not cruelly, to their own minds. Softly, the way comfortable people laugh at a thing that costs them nothing. Winifred looked at the box. She did not cry. She had promised herself 6 years ago that devotion earns nothing but its own quiet, and she had believed it. And here was the proof of it, laid across a table for 11 people to smile at. She had not stayed for a reward. She had stayed because she loved the old woman, and love does not send in a bill. So she reached out and drew the box to her, both hands, the way you'd take up something living. She held it in her lap. She stood. "Thank you," she said, to no one and to all of them. Her voice did not shake. And she walked out of the drawing-room, past the desk that was gone and the mirror that was priced, and the brothers who did not rise, and she took the one thing they had given her, and she left them the rest. The whole of the rest. She thought she had lost everything that day. You know better. But she did not. The house was Cassius's now, and Cassius wanted it empty. He was not a violent man, nor even in his own eyes an unkind one. He simply saw no reason his sister should sit rent-free in an asset. He gave her a fortnight then, pressed, a little more, and Winifred did not argue, because arguing was not in her, and because the house without grandmother in it was only walls. She packed what was hers, which was little, her clothes, her work-basket and her good scissors and her boxes of thread, her few books, and the sewing box, which she wrapped in a shawl and carried in her own 2 hands, and would let no carter touch. She took a room in Camden town. It was a narrow lodging up 2 flights, over a chandler's shop that smelled of tallow and tar, and the window looked out on a brick wall and a slice of grey sky. The landlady, Mrs. Pertwee, wanted the rent monthly and in advance, and named a figure, and Winifred paid the first month out of the little she had, and did the sum in her head of what was left, and the sum was not good. 30 days. That was what she had bought. 30 days of a roof, and after that a figure she did not have and could not see how to find. She had no wage. She had no husband, no pension, no portion. She had a box of thread and a pair of clever hands, and a word, murmured in her mind sometimes on the bad nights, that she tried not to hear too loud. The workhouse. People said it in Camden the way they said the weather, just up the road. If the rent can't be found. If the work runs dry. Winifred did not let herself say it aloud. She set out her work instead. She let it be known, quietly, through Mrs. Pertwee and the chandler and a laundress 2 doors down, that a woman upstairs took in fine sewing and mending, cheap and quick and clean. And the work came, a little of it. A torn shirt here, a hem there, a christening gown to be let out. Pennies for it, but pennies were pennies, and she bent to it by the window in the tallow light, and she did not despair, quite, because despair was another thing that was not in her. It was the box that kept her company. She had set it on the little shelf by the window, and she looked at it while she worked, and it steadied her. One evening, near the end of that first hard fortnight, with 3 shirts done and paid and the money not near enough, she took the box down into her lap to comfort herself, and she meant to turn out the old thread and reckon what colours she had and use them, because she could not afford new. That was when she felt the felt lining give under her thumb. The bottom of the box, inside, was lined with a square of green felt, old and faded near to grey. It had come loose along one edge, split at the seam where the felt met the wood, worn through at last by years of hands. A little thing. She meant only to tack it down again, for tidiness, so no pin could slip beneath and be lost. She peeled the loose corner back to make her stitch, and underneath, between the felt and the wood, tucked flat where no eye would find it, was a folded scrap of paper. Winifred went very still. She drew it out with 2 fingers. It was old paper, soft with age, folded twice, small. She opened it by the window's last light, and she knew the hand at once, the crabbed, careful, dear old hand she had read 100 grocery lists and letters in over 6 years. Winifred, it said, measure the inside against the out. That was all, no more than that. No date. No love, no name signed under it, only those 7 words in grandmother's hand, hidden under the lining of the box that no one had wanted. Measure the inside against the out. She sat holding it a long while as the room went dark. It made no sense to her, and it made every sense and both at once. It was a seamstress's line, like the last words at the bed. Mind the lining. Measure twice, and here, mind the lining sure enough, and here a thing folded under it, and she did not understand. She truly did not. But her heart was going hard against her ribs all the same. Why? That was the question that would not lie down. Not what did it mean, not yet, but why? Why leave her granddaughter, of all people, a hidden word in a box left as an insult? Why favour the one who was given nothing? What had the old woman known, lying there whispering measure twice, that 11 people in a warm room had not? Winifred folded the scrap and put it in her bodice, over her heart, and did not sleep much that night. In the morning she wrote to Mr. Blackwood. She did not write for money. That must be understood of her. She wrote a plain short letter, and she asked for one thing only, whether, of all the small effects of the house, she might purchase back, at a fair price when she could raise it, a certain miniature portrait of her grandmother as a young woman that had hung in the upstairs passage. A keepsake. Nothing of worth to anyone but her. She did not mention the scrap. She hardly knew, herself, why she did not. Something in her held it back. Blackwood's answer came a week later, and it was a curious thing. He was evasive. That was the word for it. He wrote that the disposition of the household effects was now a matter for Mr. Cassius Thorne, and that she must apply to him, which she knew already and which he knew she knew. But then, at the foot of the letter, in a different, more careful hand, as if he'd hesitated and written it against his own judgment, he added a line. He wrote that he was bound to tell her the late Mrs. Thorne had left with him, some years since, a separate instruction, sealed, to be opened only under conditions she herself had named. He had not opened it. He said no more of what it was, nor when it should be opened, nor why he mentioned it to her at all. Only that it existed, a separate instruction. Sealed, Winifred read that line a dozen times. A separate instruction. A sealed thing, waiting, in a lawyer's drawer, put there by the same hand that had folded a scrap under a lining and whispered measure twice at the last. She did not know what it was. But she knew, now, with a certainty she could not have argued in a court, that her grandmother had done something deliberate, that the box and the scrap and the sealed paper in Blackwood's keeping were not 3 accidents. They were one thing, in 3 parts, and she held only one of them, and she did not yet know how to read it. She put the letter with the scrap over her heart, and she went back to her mending, because the rent was still due, and understanding does not pay a landlady. But something had changed in her. A small, stubborn light had come on. Meanwhile, across the town, in the warm rooms she had left behind, the fortune they had seized was not sitting as easy as they'd thought. Ambrose's 40 days ran down like sand. He had grabbed his half of the £2,000 and told himself it answered everything, and then he had discovered, as spendthrifts always do, that a sum which looks like a mountain from below is a molehill once you stand on it. There were older debts he'd forgotten. There were men who wanted paying first. The 900 in notes was still 900, and the notes did not care that he felt rich, and the day they fell due came on regardless. He went to Cassius. Winifred heard of it only later, in pieces, but it went hard between the brothers. Ambrose wanted more. Cassius had none to give, because Cassius's own share was already promised elsewhere, swallowed by the mortgage he'd hung on the house before it was ever his. When Ambrose pressed him, Cassius let slip more than he meant to. And Ambrose learned for the first time that the grand Bloomsbury freehold, the solid house they'd all envied him, was mortgaged near to the roof slates to the City and Northern Bank. "You borrowed against it," Ambrose said, half laughing, half sick. "You borrowed against a house grandmother wasn't even cold in yet." "The house is a shell, Cass. You've a debt with a chimney on it, and you've a debt with nothing on it at all," Cassius said. "So sit down." They quarrelled. Two grown men in a good drawing-room, over money already spent, in a house already borrowed against, and neither of them, not once, spared a single thought for the grey sister up 2 flights in Camden, bent over a stranger's shirt by a tallow flame, or for the box they'd laughed across a table. The fortune they had grabbed was already thinner than it had looked. It had been thin all along. And the real one, the one that outweighed the house and the consoles and the silver and the whole £4,200 several times over, sat on a shelf by a brick-walled window in Camden town, with a broken clasp and a loose green lining and a bottom that had always stuck. Winifred worked late that night. The candle guttered. Her needle went in and out of a torn cuff, in and out, and her mind went round and round the 7 words in her grandmother's hand, "Measure the inside against the out." She looked up from her sewing at the box on the shelf. She looked at it a long time. And slowly, so slowly, like a woman waking, she set the cuff down in her lap. And she reached for the box, and she took up her tape measure in her other hand, and she thought, for the very first time, plainly, wide awake, that perhaps her grandmother had not been speaking of hymns at all. She measured the box the long way first, 12 inches near enough, along the outside from end to end. She wrote the number on the margin of a newspaper with a stub of pencil. Then she opened the lid and laid the tape along the inside floor, from wall to wall, and read it twice by the candle. 10 inches. A little under. 2 inches gone. 2 inches of nothing, tucked somewhere between the outside of the box and the inside. Winifred sat very still. The cuff she had been mending slid off her knee and onto the floor, and she did not stoop for it. She measured again. The same. 12 without. 10 within. She turned the box over in her lap and pressed her thumbs to the bottom that had always stuck, the bottom her grandmother had told her to leave be. Leave it be. All those years. Leave it be. She understood then that it had never been swollen wood at all. Her hands were shaking, and she was a woman whose hands never shook, not over the finest buttonhole, not by the worst light. She set the box down. She breathed. She took up her needle case and drew out the strong bodkin she used for stays. And she fetched her thimble, and she went at the join between the false floor and the true one. Slow, the way she would ease a seam she did not want to tear. The wood gave a little, a whisper of a creak. She worked the bodkin along, corner to corner, and felt the old glue let go in small dry ticks, like a clock giving up. She did not force it. Forcing was how you split good work. She coaxed and pressed and coaxed again, and at last the thin panel of rosewood lifted on one side, and she got a fingernail beneath it, and it came away in her hand. Underneath was a cavity no deeper than 2 fingers, and in the cavity, wrapped in a square of oiled silk, lay a flat packet, tied with faded tape and sealed with a blot of red wax. She lifted it out as though it might break. It was heavier than paper had a right to be. On the silk, in her grandmother's small firm hand. One word. Winifred. Just her name. Nobody else's. She sat with it in her two hands, and she did not open it. A greedier woman would have torn the wax that instant. A frightened woman might have burned it. Winifred did neither. She had nursed a dying woman 6 years and learned the weight of things done properly. Whatever this was, it had been sealed by a hand now in the ground, and it was not for her alone to break in a dim room with nobody by to see it done honest. So she wrapped it again in the oiled silk. She pinned it inside her bodice next to the scrap that already lived there. And in the morning, in her good bonnet, with her last shillings for the omnibus, she carried it to Mr. Ephraim Blackwood. He kept his office off Bedford Row, up a stair that smelled of dust and sealing wax. He was surprised to see her. She could tell. He had the look of a man who had thought that chapter closed. "Miss Thorne," he said, half rising. "I hope there is no trouble. I don't know what there is," she said. She was honest to the bone, and it did not leave her now. "I found something in my grandmother's box, sealed, in her hand. I have not opened it. I thought it ought to be opened before a witness, and I thought of you." She laid the packet on his desk. Blackwood looked at it a long moment. Then he looked at her, and something moved in his tired face, and he said, quietly, "Then perhaps the time has come." "Time for what, sir?" "For the separate instruction," he said. "Your grandmother left a sealed direction with me, Miss Thorne, near 2 years since. I was not to open it," she said, "until a certain thing came to my hand. She would not tell me what the thing was. She said I would know it when I saw it." He put his fingertips to the packet very lightly. "I believe I am looking at it now." Winifred's mouth went dry. "You never said." "I was instructed not to. I am a poor keeper of secrets by nature, Miss Thorne, but I keep the ones I am paid to keep." He drew a breath. "I should like Mr. Halloran present. He is the manager of the City and Northern Bank, and if these papers are what their weight suggests, we shall want a man who knows one paper from another. Will you leave them here, in my safe, and come again on Thursday?" She did not want to leave them. She wanted them against her skin, where she could feel them. But she nodded, because that was the honest way, and she watched him lock the packet in an iron safe the size of a coffin, and she went back out into the cold with nothing in her bodice but the 7 words, and a heart going like a drum. Thursday came slow. She sewed through it. 3 shirts and a torn flounce, because the rent was due in 9 days, and it did not care what she had found. That was the truth of poverty. It kept its appointments no matter what. At the appointed hour she climbed the dusty stair again, and this time the little room was full. Blackwood behind his desk. A stout, careful man by the window she took for Halloran, and she stopped on the threshold, Cassius, her brother Cassius, in his good black coat, standing with his hat in his hands and his colour high. "You did not tell me he would be here," she said. "He was not invited by me," Blackwood said, and his voice had an edge she had not heard from him before. "But as the residual estate is his, and as a matter of this magnitude touches the estate, the law gives him a place at the table. Sit, Miss Thorne. We will do this properly, and we will do it in the open." Cassius did not look at her. He looked at the safe. Halloran was brought forward. Blackwood took the packet out and set it on a clean blotter and held it up so all could see the seal was whole. "Unbroken," he said. "The wax is Mrs. Thorne's own. I have seen it 100 times. He looked at Winifred. "You found this where?" "In the bottom of the sewing box," she said. "Under a false floor. Sealed as you see it. I brought it straight here." "She might have opened it," Cassius said. "She might have opened it and taken what she pleased and sealed it up again with any wax at all." "I did not," Winifred said. "So you say." "The seal is hers, Mr. Thorne," Halloran said mildly, bending to it with a glass. and it has not been lifted. Wax does not lie about that. You may look for yourself." Cassius did not look. He folded his arms. Blackwood took up a paper knife. He slid it under the wax and turned it, and the seal cracked cleanly, and he unfolded the oiled silk, and inside was a second wrapping of stiff blue paper, and inside that, papers, a thick fold of them. He lifted the first sheet to the light, and his eyebrows went up, and he passed it, without a word, to Halloran. The room was very quiet. Winifred could hear a cart go by in the street below, and a dog, and the small tick of the fire. Halloran read. He read a long time for one sheet. Then he set it down and drew out the sheets beneath it, and went through them one by one, and his careful face grew more careful with every leaf he turned. "Well?" said Cassius. Halloran did not answer him. He answered the room. "These," he said, "are debentures of the Midland and Northern Counties Railway Company. Bearer bonds, gentlemen, payable to whoever lawfully holds them." He squared them on the blotter as tenderly as Winifred squared a hem. "There are 23 of them here. Their face value," he paused and wet his lips, "their face value is £11,500. Nobody spoke. Winifred heard the number, and it meant nothing to her. It was too large to be a real thing. It was a number for houses, for streets, not for a woman who owed 9 days' rent. "That cannot be," Cassius said. His voice had gone strange. 11. That cannot be right." "It is entirely right," Halloran said. "I know these bonds, sir. My own bank held the issue. The interest on them has been paid to a holding account these several years, unclaimed. The coupons are here, uncut." He turned one to the light. "Someone put these away and let the dividends stand and told no one. For years." "Mind the lining," Winifred said. She had not meant to say it aloud. "Measure twice." Blackwood looked at her. "Her last words to me," Winifred said. I thought she meant my sewing. There was a silence, and in it Cassius laughed, a short, ugly sound with no mirth in it at all. "A clerk's error," he said. "It must be. Some paper misfiled into the wrong box. It cannot have been meant. It belongs to the estate, to the residue, which is mine." He turned to Blackwood. "You will secure these. They are property of the general estate, and they fell to me under the will." "They were not in the estate, Mr. Thorne," Blackwood said. "They were in a box devised specifically and by name to your sister. The will is very plain. The personal sewing box of the late Mrs. Thorne to Miss Winifred Thorne. You read it yourself. You slid it across the table." Cassius's face went the colour of tallow. "That is a matter for the courts," he said. "I'll have counsel on it by Monday. Nothing is to move. Nothing." He rounded on Halloran. "You hear me, sir? Your bank is not to touch a farthing of it, nor transfer one bond until title is settled." "My bank will do nothing hasty," Halloran said, unruffled, "nor anything unlawful. The papers will be lodged and sealed pending the executor's determination. That is only proper." He glanced at Winifred, and there was something in it that was almost kind. "No one will lose them, Miss Thorne. Whatever the law decides, they are safe under lock while it decides." But Cassius was not finished, and neither was the packet. For Blackwood had turned the last of the debentures aside, and beneath them, folded small and creased with age, lay a single heavy document with a great pendant seal of its own, green wax on a ribbon, the kind the law hangs on a thing it means to last. He opened it flat. He read the top of it, and this time he did not pass it to Halloran. This time he read it aloud himself, slow, so that every word fell into the quiet room like a coin onto a counter. "A deed," he said, "an indenture, conveying to Adelaide Thorne, her heirs and assigns, all that parcel of land, being 62 acres, at a place called Cranshaw Fell, in the county of Durham, together with all mines, veins, and seams of coal thereunder." He looked up. "And a lease. The land is let, gentlemen, worked, there is a colliery upon it, and a rent, and a royalty on every ton drawn out of the ground." "How much?" Cassius said. It came out of him against his will. The royalty. How much? Halloran took the deed and ran his eye down it, and turned it, and did a small sum in his head, the way bankers do. On the tonnage stated in the last return, he said, and at the rate here set down, the royalty on this land runs to something near £800. In the year, he set the deed down beside the bonds, every year. For as long as there is coal in the fell, and by the survey noted here, there is a great deal of coal in the fell, £800 a year. Winifred, who had been reckoning her whole life in shillings, could not hold it. It ran through her fingers like water, £800 a year from land she had never seen, in a county she had never been to, out of the bottom of a box her brother had, called Splinters. She thought of her grandmother's face, small on the pillow, the day she died. Mind the lining. Measure twice, and the fond, faint smile, as though at a joke nobody else would live to understand. It outweighs the house, Cassius said. He was staring at the deed, and his voice was that of a man reading his own sentence. It outweighs the whole of it. The house, the consoles, the plate, all of it. Several times over, it was in the box. It was in the box the whole. He stopped. He put his hand to the back of a chair, because it had, at last, arrived at him. The house he had taken was mortgaged to the slates. The consoles his brother had taken were spent before they were touched, and the thing they had shoved across a table, laughing, thread and thimbles, fit for a thread-and-thimble life, that was the fortune. That had always been the fortune. There is one thing more, Blackwood said. He reached into the safe again. He drew out a second sealed paper, older, softer at the folds, and this one Winifred had never seen, for it had never been in the box. It had been in Blackwood's keeping 2 years and more. The separate instruction, he said. Mrs. Thorne bade me open it only when the box's secret came to my hand. It has come. I will read it as she wrote it. He broke the seal. He held it to the light. And he read, To Ephraim Blackwood, being of my mind and sound in it. When you read this, my sewing box has given up what I hid in it, and I am past caring who is angry. Hear my reasons, for I had them. I have left the house in Coram Street, and the money in the funds, to my sons, not because I loved them best, because I wished the world to see what they would do with a thing handed to them for nothing. I have watched them my whole life reach for what glittered and step over what did not. I gave them the glitter. Let it be their portrait. The rest, the true worth of what I leave, which is the coal and the bonds, I have hidden in the one thing none of them would trouble to open. And I have left it to Winifred, not because she nursed me, though she did, 6 years, and never once, not on the worst night, asked me what I meant to leave her. That is the whole of my reason, and it is reason enough. I leave the fortune to the granddaughter who never asked what she would get. Let that be her portrait too. This deed binds it. What was hidden in the box is Winifred's, wholly and only, and no residue clause, no executor, no brother, and no court of law shall take it from her. I have made it so. I was a fool about much in my life. I was not a fool about my heirs. Adelaide Thorne. Blackwood lowered the paper. For a moment, nobody moved at all. Then Cassius sat down. He did not choose to. His legs simply stopped holding him, and he went down into the chair, and he put both his hands over his face, and he said nothing, because there was nothing left in the world for him to say. Her hand, Blackwood said gently. Witnessed, dated. It is a codicil in all but name, Mr. Thorne, and it will stand in any court in England. Your claim does not lie. The box, and all it held, is your sister's. It was always your sister's. Your grandmother saw to it. Winifred did not feel triumph. She had thought, in the long nights, that if such a moment ever came, she would feel some hot rush of it. She did not. She felt her grandmother in the room. She felt the 6 years. She felt the small hand closing on hers at the end, and she understood at last what the hand had been holding. Nothing. Only the knowledge, only the secret kept warm to the grave, the last gift given the only way it could be given, by trusting her to find it. She put her face down and wept then, not for the money. She had never wept for money in her life. She wept for the old woman who had known her all along better than she had known herself. The reading of the codicil to the family was set for the following week, and it was held, at Blackwood's insistence, in the same room where the will had been read, the drawing-room of the Coram Street house in Bloomsbury that Cassius had taken and mortgaged and could not keep. Blackwood arranged it so on purpose. He had grown, in the space of a week, from an uneasy executor into something like an instrument of justice, and he meant to see it done where the wound had been made. 11 of them came, the same 11 mourning relations who had sat there before and watched a box shoved across a table. They filed in and took the chairs they had taken then. The long table stood where it had stood, and Winifred came in last, in her plain grey, with the rosewood box under her arm, and she set it on the table in the very spot from which it had been pushed at her, and she sat down behind it, and she folded her fine hands, and she waited. Blackwood read the codicil aloud, every word. The house left to be a portrait, the fortune left to the one who never asked. And when he had done, Halloran rose, and from a leather case he drew the debentures, and one by one he laid them on the table, the long crisp bonds, 11,500 pounds of them, fanned out on the very wood across which the box had been slid as a joke. And beside them he laid the deed to Cranshaw Fell, with its green seal and its ribbon, 800 pounds a year of Durham coal. On the table in the Bloomsbury house that was worth, now, less than nothing. Nobody laughed this time. Ambrose was the first to break. He had been sitting with his elbows on his knees, and his face had gone from red to white and back again through the reading, and his gambling notes were 9 days overdue, and there was a man in Camden asking after him at his lodging. He looked at the bonds on the table, and he looked at his sister, and Winifred watched the whole arithmetic of it run across his face, the 2,000 pounds he had seized, spent already, and the box he had sneered at, needle-deep in 11,000. "Winnie," he said. His voice came out thin, a boy's voice, the voice he'd used to wheedle sweets. "Winnie, you always were the good one. You were." "I said so, I always said so." She looked at him and said nothing. "It's only, you'll have heard my notes have fallen due. It's 900, that's all, 900 and the interest, and to a woman with what's on that table, it's nothing, it's a trifle, and I'd pay it back, every farthing, I'd sign whatever you liked. Winnie, you'd not see your own brother in the sponging house. You couldn't. Might you see your way to a small loan?" Between us, family, the word hung in the room. Winifred thought of Christmas and rent day. The only 2 times of the year he had climbed the Coram Street stairs, and never once past the drawing-room, never once up the 2 flights to the sick-room where she sat. Family, she did not answer him. She let the silence answer him, and it did, more completely than any word could have, and he sat back at last and put his hand over his mouth, and was quiet. Drusilla sat further down the table, very upright, with her little Morocco appraiser's book on her knee, the book in which she had once written down the worth of every stick and spoon in the house. She had priced the sewing box in that book. Winifred knew it. Splinters and a broken clasp, a shilling, give it the spinster. Drusilla did not ask for anything. She was too proud, or too stunned. She only sat with her useless ledger of prices in her lap, the whole careful science of what things were worth turned to waste paper before her, because she had spent her life valuing rooms, and never once thought to value a person, and here was the reckoning of it, fanned across the table in bonds. Winifred looked at her a moment. Only looked. There was nothing to say to a woman who had counted everything and understood nothing, and Winifred did not try to say it. The look was enough. Drusilla dropped her eyes to the little book and closed it and did not open it again. And last Cassius, he had sat through the whole of it like a man at his own graveside. He was the eldest. He had taken the house first and hardest, and he had borrowed against it before their grandmother was cold, mortgaged the address to the City and Northern Bank on the strength of the good street and the good name. And now the man from that very bank sat 3 chairs from him, Halloran, quiet and correct, with the deed to a fortune in his hands and full knowledge of the debt Cassius had raised. "There is the matter of the freehold," Halloran said into the silence, and he did not say it cruelly, which made it worse. "I speak now only as the bank's man, Mr. Thorne, and I am sorry to speak of it here, but the advance we made you against this house, it stands at more than the house will fetch. The market has turned. You will know that better than I. The security has fallen below the loan." He set the deed down gently. "The bank will want to speak with you." Soon, Cassius said nothing for a long moment. Then he raised his head, and he looked, for the first time since the will was read, directly at his sister. "You could have opened it that night," he said. His voice was ruined. "You could have opened it in your room and taken it all and told no one, and it would have been yours, and none of us the wiser. Why did you bring it to Blackwood? Why did you not just take it?" Winifred considered the question honestly, because it was honestly asked, perhaps the first honest thing he had said to her in 20 years. "Because it was sealed by her hand," she said. "And a thing sealed by a hand you love, you do not break alone in the dark. You bring it into the light and you open it before witnesses, so that whatever it is done true." She looked at the bonds and the deed, and then at him. "That is the whole difference between us, Cassius. You never knew it was there. I could not have taken it in the dark if I had wanted to. It was never mine to take. It was hers to give. And she gave it." He put his face in his hands again, and this time nobody spoke, and after a while Blackwood said, low, that the business was concluded, and the relations rose and went out one by one, and the table stood there with a fortune on it and a family broken around it. Winifred stayed last. When they were gone she stood, and she took up the rosewood box from the table, the box with the broken clasp and the loose green lining and the mended bottom, and she held it against her the way you hold a child. She had one thing to ask of Blackwood, and only one. "There is a writing desk," she said. "My mother's. Cassius carried it down the stairs the day I left. I dusted that desk 30 years. I should like to buy it back. Only that. Whatever it is worth, take it from what there is now, and the rest they seized, the house and the money, let them keep it. I'll make no claim on any of it. It was never the point." Blackwood looked at her a long moment. "You could take the house from him," he said quietly. "By rights. He mortgaged what he could not keep. You could stand by and let it fall to you for the debt, and it would be a kind of justice." "It would," Winifred said, "but it would be his kind, reaching for what glitters. She left me better than that." She settled the box in the crook of her arm. "The desk, Mr. Blackwood, that is all I want out of that house. Buy me back the desk." And that, in the end, was what crushed them worse than any suit at law. Not that she took everything, that she took nothing, that she stood in the wreck of their grasping with a fortune in her name, and asked only for an old desk she had loved, and let them keep every glittering thing they had seized, so that they should have to live inside what they had chosen, and know, every day, exactly what it was worth. A year went by, Camden town in the spring, and a bright small shop front on a street off the high road, freshly painted, with a bow window and a swept step. Over the door, in gold on green, letters a signwriter had taken pains with. Thorne and Fell, Needlework School. Fell for Cranshaw Fell. She had put the coal in the name, because the coal paid for the girls. Inside, a long clean room with good light, and a dozen girls at a dozen frames, heads bent, needles going. Girls from streets where the workhouse was a real word, not a threat. Winifred moved between them in a grey gown, still plain, still spare, her fine hands going out to lift a wrist, to turn a hoop, to show how the thread was carried at the back, so the front lay smooth. She taught the way her grandmother had taught her. Patient, close, no scolding, the good work praised, and the poor work quietly done again. On the counter by the window stood the rosewood sewing box. open, the lid up, the spools bright inside it, the false bottom mended so well you would never find the join, the green lining new and smooth. It held thread now, and thread only, in every colour the light could name. It kept no more secrets. It had given up the one it carried, and its work was done, and it sat in the sun on the counter like an old servant let at last to rest. Every girl who could not pay was paid for out of Durham coal. £800 a year came down from the fell, and Winifred spent it as her grandmother had spent her love, on the ones who did not ask. They said, if you asked after the others, that Cassius had sold the Coram Street house at a loss the bank would not fully cover, and had gone into cheaper rooms and was not a man of business any longer. They said Ambrose had taken ship for Australia one grey morning, a step ahead of his creditors, and written to no one since. And they said Drusilla, who had once put a price on everything in a little book, kept all her own boxes locked now, and carried the keys on her person, and would let no one so much as look inside them. Winifred heard these things, and did not gloat over them. She had a school to run. In the afternoon, when the girls had gone, she made tea. She warmed the pot, and set it in the window where the light came through, and she took up a piece of her own work, fine work, for the pleasure of it now, and not for the shilling, and she threaded her needle in the low gold sun. The steam rose off the pot, the thread caught the light and shone, and the old box sat open beside her, full of colour, keeping nothing back. What is loved outlasts what is only owned. Her grandmother had known it, she had staked a fortune on it, and she had won. If you've watched this far, tell me, comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far Winifred's story has travelled.